The sound of Martha's shrill voice pierced through the thin walls of our temporary bedroom, grating on my last nerve. I gripped the edge of the vanity, willing myself to take deep breaths. This was supposed to be a short-term arrangement, but it felt like an eternity. "Naomi, are you decent? I need to talk to you about dinner tonight." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 before responding. "Just a minute, Martha." I smoothed down my blouse and opened the door, plastering on a smile. "What can I help you with?" Martha's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. "You're not wearing that to dinner, are you? It's so plain." I bit back a retort. "I have a video call with my publisher in an hour. This is work attire." "Work, work, work," Martha clucked her tongue. "When are you going to focus on starting a family? You're not getting any younger, you know." The familiar ache in my chest flared up, but I pushed it down. "Jake and I will start a family when we're ready," I said, my tone clipped. Martha waved her hand dismissively. "Well, don't wait too long. Now, about dinner. I was thinking we could have pot roast, but Richard insists on grilling steaks. What do you think?" "Whatever you decide is fine," I said, eager to end the conversation. "You could at least pretend to care," Martha huffed. "This is your home now, too." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. This wasn't my home. It was a temporary living situation that was quickly becoming unbearable. Just then, Jake appeared in the hallway. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his eyes darting between Martha and me. "Oh, Jake," Martha's face lit up. "Tell your wife she needs to be more involved in family decisions. After all, you two will be living here for quite some time." Jake's expression faltered for a moment before he recovered. "Mom, Naomi's got a lot on her plate with work. Why don't you and Dad decide on dinner?" Martha's lips pursed, but she nodded. "Fine. We'll discuss this later." She turned and headed downstairs. As soon as she was out of earshot, I rounded on Jake. What did she mean? Living here for quite some time? I thought this was temporary. Jake ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. "Well, about that, the job transfer is taking longer than expected. We might need to stay here for a few more months." The room spun around me. "Months? Jake, I can't do this for months." "I know it's not ideal," Jake said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "But it's free rent, and we're saving money, plus Mom and Dad love having us here." "They love having you here," I corrected. "Your mother can barely tolerate me." Jake sighed. "You're exaggerating. Look, I've got to head to the office. We'll talk more tonight, okay?" Before I could protest, he was gone, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. Months. How was I supposed to survive months of Martha's constant judgment and Richard's belittling comments? I retreated to our room, closing the door and leaning against it. The secret I'd been carrying for years felt heavier than ever. If they knew the truth, that I couldn't have children, would it make things better or worse? My phone buzzed with a reminder about the video call. I took a deep breath, pushing my personal turmoil aside. I had work to do, a career I'd fought hard for. I wouldn't let Martha or this situation derail that. As I set up my laptop, I heard Richard's booming voice from downstairs. "Jake gone already? That boy needs to learn to relax. And that wife of his? When is she going to start contributing to this household?" I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up inside me. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned when Jake and I got married. Something had to change, and soon. But for now, I had to focus on work. It was the only thing keeping me sane in this house of judgment and secrets. Little did I know, the real storm was yet to come. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Martha rummaging through my closet. I bolted upright, heart racing. "What are you doing?" Martha turned, holding up one of my blouses with disdain. "Just seeing if you have anything suitable for the charity luncheon this afternoon." "Really, Naomi, don't you own anything with color?" I snatched the blouse from her hands. "I wasn't aware of any luncheon, and I'd appreciate it if you'd respect my privacy." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Privacy? You're living in our house, dear. And as for the luncheon, I told Jake to inform you. It's important for our family's image." I bit back a retort. Of course, Jake hadn't mentioned it. He'd been increasingly distant lately, always at work or out with colleagues. "I'm sorry, Martha, but I have a deadline today. I can't attend." Her face clouded with disappointment and anger. "You never make an effort, do you? No wonder Jake's been so stressed lately." Before I could respond, she stormed out, leaving me seething. I grabbed my laptop and headed downstairs, desperate for some coffee and solitude. But Richard was already in the kitchen, eyeing me over his newspaper. Late start today? Must be nice to have such a flexible schedule. I ignored him, focusing on making my coffee. As I reached for a mug, Richard cleared his throat. You know, Naomi, when Martha and I were your age, we already had Jake and were well established in our careers. Don't you think it's time you and Jake got serious about your future? The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Coffee splashed everywhere, including on Richard's shoes. For God's sake, he bellowed. Can't you do anything right? Something inside me snapped. Enough, I shouted, surprising even myself. I've had it with your constant criticism and lack of respect. I am a successful editor. I contribute to this household, and my personal choices are none of your business. Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you speak to me like that in my own home? Jake will hear about this. Good, I retorted. Maybe he'll finally stand up for me instead of letting you two walk all over us. I stormed out, leaving the mess behind. My hands shook as I dialed Jake's number. It went straight to voicemail. Again. Frustrated, I sent a text. We need to talk. Your parents have crossed a line. Hours passed with no response. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the tension simmering in the house. As evening approached, I heard the front door open and Jake's voice mingling with his parents'. I steeled myself and went downstairs. The conversation stopped abruptly as I entered the room. Nice of you to join us, Martha said coldly. We were just discussing your behavior today. Jake looked uncomfortable. Naomi, what happened? Dad says you yelled at him? I couldn't believe it. That's what you're concerned about. Not the fact that your mother invaded our privacy or that they both constantly belittle me? Jake ran a hand through his hair. Look, I know it's been tough, but they're just trying to help. Maybe if you made more of an effort. Made more of an effort? I interrupted, my voice rising. I've been bending over backward trying to fit into this family, but nothing I do is ever good enough. Martha gasped dramatically. After all we've done for you two. Jake, are you going to let her speak to us like this? I turned to Jake, silently pleading with him to take my side, but he just looked away, muttering, Maybe we should all calm down and discuss this rationally. In that moment, I saw my marriage for what it truly was, a sham. Jake would never stand up to his parents, never prioritize our relationship over their demands. There's nothing to discuss, I said quietly. I'm going for a walk. Don't wait up. As I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I heard Richard mutter, Good riddance. Jake called after me, Naomi, wait. But I was already gone, stepping into the cool night air, my mind reeling. For the first time since we'd moved in with Jake's parents, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Something had to change, and soon. I just didn't realize how drastic that change would be. I returned from my walk late that night, exhausted but no closer to a solution. The house was quiet, everyone presumably asleep. As I crept up the stairs, I noticed a faint light coming from Jake's study. Curious, I approached the door, left slightly ajar. Jake's voice drifted out, low and intimate. I know, Claire. I'm trying to figure it out. My heart stopped. Claire? Who was Claire? It's complicated, Jake continued. Naomi's been on edge lately, and my parents, well, you know how they are. I leaned closer, barely breathing. Soon, I promise. We'll be together soon. I love you too. The world tilted on its axis. Jake, my Jake, was having an affair. The pieces fell into place. His late nights, his distraction, his reluctance to stand up to his parents. It all made sense now. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? Just then the study door swung open. Jake stood there, phone still in hand, his face a mask of shock and guilt. Naomi, he stammered, I can explain. I held up a hand, silencing him. Don't bother, I heard enough. Jake reached for me, but I jerked away. Please, let's talk about this. Talk? I laughed bitterly. Like you talked to Claire just now? No, Jake, we're done talking. I turned and fled down the stairs, ignoring Jake's calls. I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. As I reached for the front door, Martha appeared in her robe. Naomi? What's going on? I whirled on her. Did you know about Jake and Claire? Martha's face paled, confirming my suspicions. Oh, honey, she said, reaching for me. We were going to tell you, but... But what? I spat. You were too busy criticizing me? too focused on getting your precious grandchildren? Martha flinched. That's not fair. We only want what's best for Jake. And what about me? I shouted, no longer caring who heard. Did you ever consider what was best for me? Richard appeared behind Martha, his face thunderous. Now see here, young lady. But I was beyond caring. No, you see here, I've put up with your judgment, your criticism, your constant belittling, and all this time you've been covering for Jake's affair? Jake came down the stairs, his face ashen. Naomi, please, let's discuss this privately. I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Privately? Like how you've been privately planning a life with Claire? No, Jake, we're done with secrets. I turned to Martha and Richard. You want to know why we don't have children? Because I can't have them. That's right, your precious son married a barren woman. How's that for your perfect family image? The silence that followed was deafening. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Richard stood slack-jawed, and Jake looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Naomi, he whispered, why didn't you tell me? I met his gaze, my voice cold. Would it have mattered? Would it have stopped you from falling into Claire's arms? Jake had no answer. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. That's what I thought. I turned to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I'll be back for my things tomorrow. Don't try to stop me. As I stepped out into the night for the second time, I heard Martha's wail and Richard's angry shouts. But I didn't look back. My world had shattered, but from the ruins I would build something new. Something that was truly mine. I pulled out my phone and dialed my best friend's number. Sarah, it's me. I need a place to stay, and I need a good divorce lawyer. As I walked away from the house that had never been my home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I was free. I spent the night at Sarah's, tossing and turning as my mind raced. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I had to face Jake, to end this charade once and for all. Sarah squeezed my hand as I left. You've got this, Naomi. Remember, you deserve better. I nodded, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. When I arrived at Jake's parents' house, Martha opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed. Naomi, please, she began, but I brushed past her. Jake was in the living room, looking as if he hadn't slept either. Naomi, he said, rising. I'm so glad you came back. We need to talk. Yes, we do, I replied coldly. But first I want you to look me in the eye and tell me everything about Claire. Jake flinched but held my gaze. Claire and we've been seeing each other for 6 months. It started as a friendship, but you fell in love, I finished for him. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. He nodded miserably. I never meant to hurt you, Naomi. I felt trapped. The pressure from my parents, your focus on your career, I know it's no excuse, but you're right, I cut him off. It's no excuse. Do you have any idea what I've been going through? The constant criticism, the loneliness, the guilt about not being able to give you children. Jake's eyes widened. About that. Why didn't you tell me? I laughed bitterly. When, Jake? When you were too busy with work, or when you were sneaking around with Claire? Martha and Richard hovered in the doorway, their faces a mixture of shame and indignation. We had no idea, Martha said softly. If we'd known. You'd what? I snapped. Treat me with basic human decency? I shouldn't have had to earn that. Richard stepped forward, his face flushed. Now see here, young lady. No, you see here, I interrupted, my voice rising. I've put up with your judgment and your son's betrayal for far too long. I want a divorce, Jake. The room fell silent. Jake's face crumpled, but to my surprise he nodded. If that's what you want, I won't fight you on it. His easy acquiescence was like a knife to my heart. After everything, he wouldn't even fight for our marriage. That's it? I asked, my voice breaking. You're just going to let me go? Jake spread his hands helplessly. What do you want me to say, Naomi? We've been unhappy for a long time. Maybe this is for the best. I felt something inside me shatter, the last remnants of hope, perhaps. Or maybe it was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. Fine, I said, my voice eerily calm. I'll have my lawyer contact you. I want you out of our apartment by the end of the week. Jake's head snapped up. What? But where am I supposed to go? I gestured around the room. You seem quite comfortable here with Mommy and Daddy. I'm sure they'll be happy to have you. Martha stepped forward, her face pale. Naomi, please, can't we discuss this? I turned to her, my eyes blazing. There's nothing to discuss. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. As I headed for the door, Jake called out, "Naomi, wait! What about everything we've built together?" I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "You mean the life you were planning with Claire? Or the clothing line we were developing?" Jake's face paled. "The clothing line. Naomi, you wouldn't what?" I asked, a dangerous edge to my voice. "Wouldn't fight for what's rightfully mine. You'd be surprised what I'm capable of, Jake." With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I got into my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief, anger, but also a sense of liberation. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. "Hello, is this Claire? We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street in an hour. Trust me, you'll want to hear what I have to say." As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Jake watching from the window. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. I sat at the coffee shop, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug, waiting for Claire. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say, all the anger and hurt I wanted to unleash. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She was younger than I'd imagined, probably in her late 20s, with long blonde hair and a hesitant smile. "Naomi?" she asked, approaching my table. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I assume you know who I am?" Claire nodded, her face pale. "Jake's wife. I'm so sorry." I held up a hand. "Save it. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for the truth." Over the next hour, Claire spilled everything. How she'd met Jake at a work conference, how he'd pursued her relentlessly, spinning tales of an unhappy marriage and a wife who didn't understand him. "He told me you two were separated," Claire said, tears in her eyes. "That you were only staying together for appearances. I swear, if I'd known—" I laughed bitterly. "Oh, we were separated all right, by his lies and his cowardice." As Claire continued to talk, a plan began to form in my mind. Jake had lied to both of us, manipulated us for his own gain. It was time he faced the consequences. "Claire," I interrupted her rambling apologies, "I have a proposition for you." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward. "Jake's been playing us both. What do you say we turn the tables on him?" By the time I left the coffee shop, Claire and I had hatched a plan that would make Jake's head spin. But first, I had one more stop to make. I drove back to Jake's parents' house, my resolve strengthening with each mile. When Martha opened the door, her face fell. "Naomi, please, can we talk about this?" she pleaded. I brushed past her, marching into the living room where Richard sat in his armchair. "Where's Jake?" I demanded. "He's not here," Richard growled. "And after the way you spoke to us yesterday—" "Shut up," I snapped, surprising even myself with my vehemence. "You two have done nothing but criticize and belittle me from the day I married your son. Well, now you're going to listen." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to reveal. "You want to know why Jake and I don't have children? Why your precious son sought comfort in another woman's arms? It's because I can't have children. I'm infertile." Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard's face paled. "That's right," I continued, my voice shaking with emotion. "I've known for years, but I couldn't bear to tell anyone, not even Jake. I was too afraid of losing him, of disappointing everyone. But you know what? I'm not afraid anymore." I turned to Martha, my eyes blazing. "Your constant nagging about grandchildren, your snide comments about my career, did you ever stop to think about how that made me feel? Did you ever consider that there might be a reason we didn't have children yet?" Martha began to sob, but I wasn't finished. I rounded on Richard. "And your belittling remarks, your dismissal of my work, did it make you feel like a big man to tear down your daughter-in-law?" Richard opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "No, I don't want to hear it. I'm done with your excuses, your judgment, your toxic family dynamics. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to make sure Jake pays for every lie he's told." As I turned to leave, Martha called out, "Naomi, wait! We didn't know. We never meant—" I paused at the door, looking back at their shell-shocked faces. "It's too late for apologies. You've made your bed, now lie in it. And tell him he hasn't seen anything yet." With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I got into my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief for the family I'd lost, anger at the betrayal, but also a fierce determination. Jake and his parents had no idea what was coming. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. "It's time," I said. "Let's take him for everything he's got." I stormed into Jake's parents' house, my lawyer's words still ringing in my ears. "We've got him cornered, Naomi. Don't let them manipulate you." The living room fell silent as I entered, Jake, Martha, and Richard all turning to stare at me with a mix of fear and apprehension. "Naomi," Jake started, rising from his seat. "I'm glad you're here. We need to talk." "Oh, we're well past talking," I cut him off, my voice ice cold. "I'm here to settle this once and for all." Martha stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Please, dear, let's all calm down and discuss this rationally." I laughed bitterly. "Rationally? Like how you've all been acting so rationally behind my back." Richard's face reddened. "Now see here, young lady." "No, you see here," I snapped, silencing him with a glare. "I've had enough of your condescension and your lies, all of you." Jake approached me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Naomi, I know I've made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Is that what you call having an affair and planning a new life with another woman?" Martha gasped, her eyes darting between Jake and me. "Jake, what is she talking about?" I turned to Martha, my eyes blazing. "Oh, don't pretend you didn't know. In fact, why don't you tell me exactly what you knew?" Martha's face paled, and she stumbled back, collapsing onto the sofa. I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me," I shouted, my composure finally cracking. "I want the truth, all of it right now." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Then, to my shock, Martha began to sob. "We just wanted grandchildren," she wailed, her words tumbling out in a rush. We thought if Jake met someone else, someone younger." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the implications of her words sank in. You engineered Jake's affair?" I whispered, disbelief coloring my voice. Richard stepped forward, his face a mask of shame and defiance. "Now, Naomi, you have to understand. We only wanted what was best for Jake, for the family." "Best for the family?" I repeated, my voice rising hysterically. "You destroyed your son's marriage, and you think that was best for the family?" Jake stood frozen, his face ashen. "Mom, Dad, is this true?" Martha nodded miserably. "We introduced you to Claire at that charity gala. We encouraged her to pursue you." I felt as if I'd been punched in the gut. All this time I'd blamed myself, my infertility, my focus on my career, but it had been them orchestrating this betrayal from the shadows. "How could you?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Jake turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Naomi, I swear, I didn't know. I mean, yes, I made my own choices, but I had no idea they were behind it." I shook my head, backing away from all of them. "It doesn't matter. Don't you see? This family is toxic. You've all been lying and manipulating each other, and for what? Some twisted idea of what a perfect family should be?" Martha reached out to me. "Naomi, please. We can fix this. We can start over." "No." I cut her off, my voice firm despite my tears. "There's no fixing this. You've broken something that can never be repaired." I turned to Jake, meeting his eyes one last time. "I hope you and Claire are very happy together. You deserve each other." As I walked out of that house for the last time, I felt a strange mix of devastation and liberation. My world had been shattered, but from the ruins I would build something new, something honest, something mine. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. "It's time," I said, my voice steady. "Let's end this once and for all." Little did they know, I had one last card to play, and it would change everything. The next morning I stood outside the courthouse, my heart pounding. Today was the day everything would change. My lawyer, Sarah, squeezed my arm reassuringly. "You've got this, Naomi. Remember, we have all the evidence." I nodded, taking a deep breath as we entered the building. Jake, Martha, and Richard were already there, huddled together with their lawyer. Jake's eyes met mine, a mixture of guilt and defiance in his gaze. As we took our seats, the judge entered and the proceedings began. Jake's lawyer presented their case first, painting me as a career-obsessed wife who neglected her family duties. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to remain calm. Then it was our turn. Sarah stood, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, we have evidence that will change everything you've heard today." She presented the recordings I'd made of Martha and Richard, admitting to engineering Jake's affair, the text messages between Jake and Claire, and financial records showing how Jake had been funneling money into a separate account for his new life with Claire. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Jake's face paled. while Martha and Richard looked shell-shocked. The judge called for order, his face stern. "Mr. Thompson," he addressed Jake, "do you have anything to say about these allegations?" Jake stood slowly, his shoulders slumped. "Your Honor, I can't deny it. My parents did introduce me to Claire, but—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "But I made my own choices. I betrayed my wife, and I'm deeply ashamed." Martha let out a strangled sob. "Jake, no. We did it for you, for the family." The judge silenced her with a sharp look. "Mrs. Thompson, you'll have your chance to speak. Now, Mr. Thompson, continue." Jake turned to face me, his eyes brimming with tears. "Naomi, I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but you deserve to know the truth. Yes, my parents introduced me to Claire, but I pursued the affair. I let their pressure about having children cloud my judgment. I was weak, and I hurt you in the worst way possible." The courtroom fell silent. I felt all eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. My hands shook as I stood. "Your Honor," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "I have one more thing to add." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to reveal. "The reason Jake and I didn't have children, it's because I can't. I'm infertile." Gasps echoed through the room. Martha's hand flew to her mouth, while Richard's face strained of color. "I've known for years," I continued, tears streaming down my face. "But I was too afraid to tell anyone, even Jake. I was terrified of losing him, of disappointing everyone, but now I see that my silence only made things worse." I turned to face Jake and his parents directly. "Your constant pressure, your manipulation, your betrayal, it all stems from this obsession with having the perfect family. Well, guess what? There's no such thing as a perfect family, and in trying to create one, you've destroyed everything we had." The judge cleared his throat, his expression somber. "This is clearly a complex situation with fault on multiple sides. We'll take a brief recess, and then I'll deliver my decision." As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The truth was finally out. All of it. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd done the right thing. Sarah touched my arm. "Naomi, there's someone here to see you." I turned to see Claire standing nervously in the hallway. My heart raced as I approached her, unsure of what to expect. "Naomi," she said, her voice shaking, "I have something you need to hear. Something that will change everything." As Claire began to speak, I realized that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a whole new chapter. Claire's revelation hit me like a tidal wave. She wasn't just Jake's mistress, she was carrying his child. The irony was almost too much to bear. All those years of pressure, of feeling inadequate, and now this. I stumbled back into the courtroom, my mind reeling. Jake's eyes met mine, confusion etched across his face. He didn't know. Not yet. The judge called the session to order, ready to deliver his verdict. But I couldn't let it end like this. I stood up, my voice shaking but determined. "Your Honor, if I may, there's been a new development." The judge nodded, and I took a deep breath. "Claire, Jake's companion, is pregnant with his child." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Martha let out a strangled cry of joy, while Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red. Jake sat there, stunned into silence. "Order!" The judge's gavel came down hard. "Mrs. Thompson, is this verified?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "Claire is here to confirm it herself." As Claire was brought in to testify, I watched the faces of those who had hurt me so deeply. Martha and Richard, their manipulative scheme finally bearing fruit, but at what cost? Jake, the father-to-be, looking lost and ashamed. When the dust settled, the judge delivered his final verdict. The divorce was granted, with a settlement heavily in my favor due to Jake's infidelity and financial deception. But it felt hollow. No amount of money could heal the wounds inflicted by their betrayal. As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Jake. "Naomi, I don't know what to say." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. "There's nothing left to say, Jake. You're going to be a father. Isn't that what you always wanted?" His face crumpled. "Not like this. Never like this." I shook my head, a sad smile on my face. "It's too late for regrets now. You've made your choices. Now you have to live with them." As I turned to leave, Martha approached, her eyes brimming with tears. "Naomi, dear, please. Can't we talk about this? We're still family." "No," I cut her off firmly. "We're not family. We never really were. You made sure of that." I walked away, leaving them all behind. Sarah, my lawyer and friend, fell into step beside me. "So, What now? She asked gently. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. Now I start over, on my terms. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I moved back into my old apartment, which I'd kept as a secret sanctuary all this time. I poured my energy into my work, finally free to pursue my career without guilt or judgment. The clothing line Jake and I had been developing? I bought out his share and rebranded it as a line for strong, independent women. It was a hit, far more successful than it ever would have been under Jake's influence. As for children, I decided to become a mentor to young girls interested in publishing. It wasn't the family I'd once dreamed of, but it filled my heart in ways I never expected. 1 year to the day after the divorce was finalized, I stood in my apartment looking out over the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, inviting me to dinner to celebrate my recent promotion. As I grabbed my coat, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more content than the one who had lived in fear of disappointing others. I smiled at my reflection. "You did it, Naomi," I whispered. "You found your happy ending." As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road had been hard, the betrayals deep, but I had survived. More than that, I had thrived. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time I was the author of my own destiny.